Everybody, this is Dream, and tomorrow we have our first game, first day of the NBA season. We're gonna feature two games on the slate with the Lakers and Denver, and then Phoenix and the Golden State Warriors. So we do have some interesting things here. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. Really do appreciate it, guys. As for DraftKings and FanDuel today, I'm gonna look at DraftKings first, then I'll show you FanDuel stuff. Though it'll be a little bit different than how I'm doing it on DraftKings here. Let's go and get into it though. So let's get started with our top plays here. So Jokic for Denver is actually only $10,000, which is quite cheap for him. He has some absolutely monster upside here, being underpriced, and he's some big games against the Lakers this season. A triple double is definitely in order here, especially if he has any desire to come out with a big game. I think he probably will. So I imagine he's going to dominate this game, start to finish. However, there is some risk that this game gets out of hand, so could be a little bit of concern. All the expensive players today are pretty cheap here on DraftKings, which is kind of unusual, and that will lead us to Anthony Davis at $8,900. Now, he's been up and down most of the time at his, when he plays fantasy, but his price point right now is just too good to ignore. He's going to get over 10,000 for most of the season, and in 6 of the 7 games that he's faced Denver last year, he scored over 49 fantasy points. His price is just way under today, which gives him a lot of upside. So he's very cheap here, has a lot of potential to 5 and 6x. Kevin Durant also in a great spot at just $8,400. He only needs 42 fantasy points to pay off here, which I only could find about 10 games last season where he didn't 5x at this price point. If Booker misses this game, it also gives him a massive boost, and so I do like his upside. Though we're going to have to see how Phoenix plays with the different guys, and they do have a tougher matchup against Golden State. But I do think the Durant is almost an auto play on the slate on DraftKings here because of his price, and that makes him very useful. Devin Booker is a good price as well at $8,300, but he's also questionable. I do think he ends up playing, but without Chris Paul, he's probably going to be playing some point guard along with Bradley Beal. It's hard to know how the shots will be distributed right now. Obviously, Durant looks the safest, but Booker looks pretty safe, but not as safe as Durant does. He definitely has good upside in this matchup, and his price is still cheap, though it'll probably fall in the mid 9,000s for most of the season, I would guess. Looking at Chris Paul for Golden State, now he is criminally underpriced. Now we don't really know for certain how his how he's going to be on this slate or in the season for Golden State, with the starters mostly being pretty figured out for Golden State. I guess they're going to go small probably with Chris Paul being a starter potentially. So we'll have to see what he decides to do, what they decide to do with him and Curry and Klay Thompson. Granted that Draymond Green can play center, so that does give them some utility to move him to center and have Wiggins on the floor as well. Still, still a pretty guard-heavy lineup there. Obviously, he needs 28 fantasy points to pay off here. It just really depends on the minutes he gets and the role he ultimately has. His price definitely gives him a lot of upside here on DraftKings. He's a lot more expensive on FanDuel, and so from that perspective alone, he's probably going to be very highly used on DraftKings. Looking at Andrew Wiggins, his teammate here, it's going to be interesting to see how Wiggins figures out his role. He's starting the season as a power forward slot here on DraftKings, so that gives him some utility simply because there's not going to be a ton of power forward options at these cheaper prices. So I think he's a viable option here. In 3 games versus Phoenix, he scored over 33 fantasy points twice. Obviously, the bad game is a risk here, especially if Durant guards him, which would make his game very difficult. But he's definitely a capable option on the slate. Michael Porter Jr. for Denver is a good option today, I think. He's a little bit safer than Aaron Gordon is on the slate. He's definitely capable here. He's high risk, high reward, as both these guys tend to be same price. So Porter does have some upside that Gordon doesn't. Gordon had scored 18 to 28 fantasy point range against the Lakers last season, whereas Porter was in the 25 to 30 range. And so I think Porter's got an edge here. Definitely not a must play by any stretch, but they're nice at price points for Porter, and so I think he's a viable option here. Then we'll look at Mr. Caldwell Pope for Denver as well. He's a teammate there. In 6 of the last 8 games against the Lakers last year, he scored 23 or better fantasy points. If he can get into double digits in just total points, then he'll pay off here, which I do think is a pretty high chance of happening here. The question here is if he's going to get enough fantasy points to really pay off. but he's gonna have, he's gotta get those regular points. He's gonna get some assists and rebounds and random other things. So it's just a matter of getting enough points to get him over the hump from the 5x perspective. Looking at Draymond Green, he is questionable, and if he does play, he'll be in play at this nice reduced price point. Obviously, he has big time potential. He has opportunities to get double doubles and triple doubles just about every time he's on the court. The question is if he's going to play. He didn't play the preseason, so we'll have to wait and see. Uh, there's not much news on him yet, but he's priced really good, so if he does play, he'll be somebody to consider. Then we're going to look at Jared Vanderbilt. Now, he is actually relatively doubtful to play, or at least he's doubtful to start. It does look like Tareem Prince is going to play and start, but Vanderbilt has been pretty good in the regular season. He was terrible in the playoffs, but he was good there in the regular season last year, and he got in the 18 to 25 range a lot, which gives him some utility here, though he doesn't need to start to really pay off, so do keep that in mind. Okiogi is in a very similar situation to Vanderbilt, only we know he's probably going to start. He didn't do very good in the playoffs, but his fantasy production is better during the regular season as a starter. He should start right now as a starter. I don't expect too much with both Booker, Durant, and Beal being most of the shots, but if he can slew out some rebounds and assists and stuff, that can definitely give him some utility. And he can, he doesn't need a ton of fantasy points to pay off, but he at $4,000. But he's definitely a capable option, and I do think he'll be popular as a value play because there's not many players that are dirt cheap. As for Gabe Vincent for the Lakers, he's also an interesting spot here. The downside comes to how many minutes he's actually going to get. He's not likely going to start, at least early in the season, but he could grow into that role. He was pretty solid last year for Miami, and I look for him to have 25 to 30 minutes a game, hopefully. And if that's the case, then he can definitely score the fantasy points needed at this price point. He's actually pretty cheap here at $4,500 for a good bench roll. So we'll have to wait and see how the starting situation plays out and also minutes, but he looks like a pretty good price on this slate. As for Tareem Prince, I mentioned him when I talked about Jared Vanderbilt. Now, Prince has a lot of upside here, especially if he starts. He's got some good games as a starter. If the game gets out of hand, then he definitely gets more benefit as well because he'll stay on the floor. But he is high risk, high reward because he's kind of a scrappy player, but he definitely has a very low ceiling and high floor. And so, he has a low floor and high ceiling, so he can be all over the place fantasy-wise. I'm going to also mention Eric Gordon. This is only if he ends up drawing the start because Booker's out. If Booker or Beal are ruled out, though, he would draw a start, and he could be very interesting. He's high risk, but he feels safer than Grayson Allen since Allen is more expensive. But he would have to start to really pay off here. But he will chuck up some shots if that's the case. So that's what I have here for DraftKings. I think the slate is pretty interesting, despite the fact that it's going to be somewhat hard to build roster here. Let's look at our FanDuel options. So right here, I've actually compared the pricing for the two slates, and you can see that the most expensive players are a lot more expensive on FanDuel than they are DraftKings. However, on DraftKings, the way you choose players is a little bit different, and you have a little bit more money to work with on FanDuel. So that does benefit you. I'm going to go team to team here. For the Lakers, we're going to look at Davis and LeBron as the primary two options for the team, along with D'Angelo Russell at $6,200. Russell's about the same price, and he has some upside here. I think he's a little bit safer than Reeves, and so he's going to draw the potential option here for a guard on FanDuel. Davis and LeBron both have some upside, though they are pretty expensive. I do like Davis better than LeBron, but I could look for LeBron to have a big game in his first game of the season. Looking at Tareem Prince, now he's a little bit more expensive here on FanDuel, but that's okay. We can handle that. If he can get up to 21 fantasy points at this price point, at being the starter. If Vanderbilt doesn't start, then that will definitely, or doesn't play, that will definitely benefit Prince a lot more. Moving at the Nuggets, obviously Jokic is a valuable option, though he is very expensive here on FanDuel. He's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings. As for Murray, Gordon, Porter Jr., and Caldwell Pope, I think all of them are in play on FanDuel. Murray a little bit risky, but Gordon, Porter Jr., and Caldwell Pope all have a lot of utility on the slate on the site, with their price points being relatively the same as DraftKings, and I think that gives them a lot of utility here. Moving to the Warriors, CP3 is a lot more expensive here, and he's going to be hard to roster on FanDuel due to the price. Klay Thompson and Looney are both a little bit cheaper. I think Klay Thompson is fairly priced here on FanDuel, unlike on DraftKings, where he's a little bit pricey compared to the other options on his team. But I do think he's a viable option here. Looney also has some risk, but if Draymond doesn't play, then that would give him some utility. Draymond is really hard to roster on FanDuel, where he's a lot more expensive and takes more fantasy points to pay off. Looking at the Suns, Durant and Booker obviously in play. Durant's probably my favorite player of the slate. I think he's going to have a big game here. Um, Booker does have some utility if he draws a start, but he's high risk, high reward because he may not start. And if obviously Okiogi looks like he's a pretty solid option for FanDuel as well, especially considering he can get some of those peripheral stats to give him some upside. And then if Booker doesn't play, then Eric Gordon would be in position. Bradley Beal is a little bit over expensive here on FanDuel as well. A lot of the guys at the expensive end are more expensive here. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.